If there was an award for the most liked person in the NFT space, Bryan might be crowned the champion. Whether you know Bryan personally or not is totally insignificant. You most likely know of him. You probably have collected some of his work. You certainly have been exposed to his thoughts and the way that he shares winsomely, whether he's writing something out or creating something that many people find moving and significant. It's easy to call Bryan a powerhouse digital artist. His vibrant animations, his storytelling, and everyone wants to have a conversation like I'm about to have with Bryan. Even the founder of NFT NYC, when he realized Bryan would be there, right away he said, "Well, I'm doing a fireside chat with Bryan." Why? Of all the people that are going to be at our event, Jody only handpicks a few that he finds to be the most important, most intriguing, that he's most curious about. And I too am curious about what this conversation that Bryan and I are about to have will create. This is what this is. This is an authentic conversation. I'm at my house. It looks like Bryan's at his house or his office. So, Bryan, come on stage and let's share a moment together. Hello, my friend.
Hello. Hey, Ian. How are you? Thank you for that very lovely introduction.
You deserve it. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I mean, is that a real background behind you?
This is real. This is real. This is actually
goodness.
the Pacific Ocean.
Holy
This is
moly.
really the oldest resort in California.
That sun on your arm proved it. I was like, I don't believe it.
Yes,
there it is.
Done. I got about an hour, and then I'm gonna get blasted, and I have to hide.
Amazing.
My dad and I built this place 24 years ago, and I remember I'm 44 today, so I was about 20, and I remember sitting on this balcony as a 20-year-old, and I built the little beach house that we're in. There's a coffee shop here, there's a restaurant here, a restaurant below us, and I remember thinking to myself, somebody gets to live here. I want to live here. And then a couple years ago, it became available, and here I am. And it's funny because my wife and our 3 sons are here. It's a super tiny place, and we have another option of like a big, huge place up on top of the hill. I'm like, you guys want to go to like an actual big house and not just a little beach apartment? No. We want to live on the sand. We're not going anywhere. So we are happy here, and it's always nice to welcome people to my home, whether that's you for a conversation or all the party people that are listening to our conversation live or another time. How about you? Where are you at right now?
Oh, I live kind of just north of New York City in kind of like the Westchester White Plains area. So it's like rainy and gloomy here. It's the exact opposite of what I see. So I should probably turn on a light so it's a little brighter in here. But yeah, it's not bad. It'll get warmer in a few days.
Yeah. Well, we picked the right time. We picked the right time for NFT NYC. We have done NFT NYC February's, November's, June's, April's. June was always my favorite.
June's good. June's good before it gets gross. I mean, right now is like probably the next month is probably the best time in New York, maybe. Right. But June is where it gets actually nice and warm, but July, August is where it gets like real humid and gross. And it's not a good time.
Yes. So thanks for jumping in with me. All these years, I've done over 500 of these. Have you and I sat down? Have we sat down and had a conversation like this for NFT NYC in the past?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I don't think so.
I feel like we haven't. And I was trying to find one if we had one in the past. I'm like, I don't see one with Bryan. We bumped into each other a lot. So here we are.
So now you're the veteran at this point.
Yeah. Well, now you know what? That's it. I'm canceling the next one. This is my final one. Everybody, peace out. I'm finishing with Bryan. I want to ask you about something. I feel like it's very easy for people to spotlight one thing that they think that you're great at. Not to say you're better than anybody else in any of these things, but you have been really effective for many years in 3 things in my mind as a minimum. One is the creation of art. Your ability to create art and co-create art, your ability to create art that people love to look at, engage with, and even own is, world class. Like you're amongst a top echelon. So that's like really cool. Another thing that's really unique about you is your ability to cultivate community, both community of peers, a connection community to your technology partners, and especially community to people that want to collect your art. And then finally, your ability to forge partnerships with people. Like I know that Josie and the Cyberbrokers team just launched Grifters. You're one of the collaborators with Grifters. That's an example of dozens, if not hundreds of times where you've been invited. It's not like you're banging on Jody's door, like, let me participate in Grifters, right? Everybody likes you. They like your art. They recognize that you're good with the community, the collectors, the partners. You've maintained a great reputation over these years. And so if I had to say, I think you, Bryan, are great at a few things: creating art, community, and partnerships. Were those natural, or do you feel like you naturally are gifted in one area and you've had to kind of build up one or two areas because it takes that trio to accomplish, some of the things that you've been able to accomplish? I just like to talk about the diversity of being a well-rounded NFT artist and community participant. Let me start with that.
I think that's a great question, and thank you. I wouldn't say I'm naturally gifted in anything. I think everything is learned and comes from repetition and trying things out and learning from others and all this other aspect of just growing. But what you mentioned, art, community, partnerships, that goes back to the core of like when artists ask me for advice on how to operate in the space. I often say you have to divide your energy three ways. One third making art, one third marketing art, and one third being authentically a part of the community. And that last part's tough because a lot of people come in here just wanting to make some money. But the people that succeed are the ones that are authentically curious in the space, and they're excited to learn. They're excited to experiment. My success, you talk about these partnerships that end up being really, important, whether it's like art blocks or all this other stuff. Those were not things that I went into expecting them to be big things. I was early on those things. Like I was Nifty Gateway and art blocks and all these, all these things were just, I was curious about the platforms. I was like, oh, generative art, that's really interesting. I wonder if I can do something with that. Oh, async art, that's really interesting. I wonder if I can do something with that. And like looking at these opportunities and then getting curious and finding a way to kind of integrate my creativity into these, walls that are built on these platforms or partnerships or whatever. And I think just over time, being seen as being someone that's curious puts you on a list when people are like, oh, who might be interested in doing this project? And so I'm grateful that, people think of me. I think that's the hardest thing in the space is to be thought of, be on the top of people's minds. Cause usually they'll go, hey, we have this project. We need 10 artists. And how do you get on those, how do you get on those lists? This is, even before NFTs, working in like the TV industry is the same way, where it's like, oh, we need a motion graphics artist. Oh, who do I know that does this? And how, it's usually who you've interacted with the most recently. And so for me, it's always being present, being in Discords, being in Telegrams, being on Twitter, always making content and being visible in that sense lends itself to just being on people's minds and putting myself in a fortunate position where they reach out to me and ask me to do cool things.
Well, I have a lot of questions for you. I want to ask you this. Yeah, I think it's kind of a unique question. I hope it comes across right. You come across with a humble demeanor. Nobody that's achieved as much as you have is only humble. You obviously are incredibly ambitious, incredibly driven, unstoppable, courageous, or you cannot do what you've done. So it's impossible. But the way you communicate is very zen and very chill and not pretentious and not diva. So, and you do that in our conversation right now, even with my compliments, the way you receive my compliments, acknowledge them, but don't. Okay, I give you compliments and you treat them like perfume, right? You like, that smells nice, thanks. But you're not like drinking the perfume. And a lot of people do. Like, oh, dude, that's what I live for. I just want to be praised. You certainly don't come across that way. So is maintaining a zen attitude and demeanor and maintaining a certain sense of meekness about you. Is that something that you are mindful of? Is it something that you've always kind of had that way about you, where you just um, kind of present yourself as understated on purpose, and you don't have, like, you're not trying to push out this, like, I'm this badass type of thing? Can you talk to me a bit about your attitude and demeanor, and if it's on purpose or if it's just been cultivated over time?
That's a great question, and that goes back to that idea of being authentic. Do I? That's a good. I don't know how to approach that. Let's see. Where does it come from? My humbleness and my demeanor come from, decades of imposter syndrome. So that, no matter what I accomplish, I'm always going to think I'm not good enough. And that is just embedded in being an artist to a degree,
Right.
where, and it also, when I see artists that have that ego, it turns me off.
Right.
And I'm actively trying not to be like that, because I see that as someone who, well, I don't know if it goes both ways. There are times where I see artists that are very sure of themselves and beating their egos and doing that, finding more success, because sometimes collectors like those type of artists because it presents a level of, this artist is sure of themselves, and that makes me sure about investing in them. Where sometimes I go, maybe I should be more, strong-willed in that way, but it would be tough for me to keep up that demeanor, because it's just, again, not who I am. And I would much rather be an understated artist that exceeds expectations than someone that presents, some sort of like grand vision that I'm going after, because that's not who I am. I'm an artist that is constantly trying to evolve and try new things and experiment. I don't have, I have a 30-year plan of I want to be an artist for 30 years, but I don't have like this grand vision of this thing I'm building, other than I'm building this big catalog of things over time. And so, it goes back and forth in that sense. But I would like to hope it's an authentic version of me. Sometimes my Twitter persona is a little more snarky, and I have to kind of use that that lingo for engagement purposes. And sometimes I'll throw out like a inflammatory tweet or something just to get people riled up, because I know how the algorithm works. But yeah, I try not to be full of myself, and some of that just comes from my background working in like the TV industry and stuff like that, and actually seeing what like real famous people like. Look, there's so not to demean anybody in the space, but like my mom can't name a single famous artist that's living right now.
Right.
And nobody outside of our small bubble knows who the top 3 NFT artists are. They might have heard of Beeple, maybe,
right, because the media.
But we're all nobodies in the scheme of actual fame. And so to have any sort of ego, I always tell people that I'm like a micro influencer in a niche genre. And like that is, I am a tiny little thing in this bigger thing. And that thing is still a very tiny thing in the spectrum of everything. Like, even NFTs in the spectrum of the art world is small. And the art world is small compared to the Pokemon collectible world. And so I think
it's the gaming world, I mean, it's just like there's so many bigger worlds.
Yeah, film directors, they're famous, but like painters are not famous. And so I would say the most famous, if you think about animation, it's like Matt Groening and Seth MacFarlane, and like TV show type people are the most famous of that genre. And so I think that's what humbles me all the time, is that there's never a point where I'm like, oh, I've made it, and also I don't really want to make it. I don't want to be famous and have people like knocking on my door and like having to worry about like security and all this other stuff. I just want to make a living being an artist.
Yeah. Violetta Zeroni, one of the top musicians in the NFT industry, recently
I know her work.
She had a song acquired for a Bitcoin recently. Metakoven bought Beeple's collection for almost $100 million. When I think about those types of things, I don't think of Violetta selling a song for Bitcoin, and I don't think of Beeple selling a collection for $70 million. I think of someone honoring Violetta and honoring NFT music, and it was the collector that bought the item to support an artist and to support an industry. It was Metakoven that bought the collection to basically support Beeple for life and more or less put the Ethereum approach to digital assets on the global map. So it wasn't Beeple that sold it. It wasn't Violetta that sold it. It was the person that bought it for a Bitcoin. It was Metakoven that bought it. Yeah. So in your experience, have you had a moment where you personally or one of your peers has had like a big moment, a big sale, and you think to yourself, there's no way I could have talked someone into buying that. They bought that to support me. They bought that to support the industry. And it doesn't have to be your own thing. It could be another one of our mutual friends. It could be something that you saw that happened with Rafiq or whatever. But is there times that you look and you go, this is way, like what just happened is bigger than a person, myself or whatever, that created art and sold it. I did not sell it. Somebody bought it because it was about a moment. It was about making a statement. Can you talk with me a bit about that philosophy of artists don't always just sell something. Sometimes collectors buy something because it's about a bigger narrative than just owning something and hoping that it retains or goes up in value.
Yeah, and I think I have an example that ties into that well. And what you're kind of describing is historical firsts or like historical NFTs. And that is, there's value in art that is the first of something. And so speaking of Metakoven, they bought my first music NFT, which was released as the first drop on Async Music, which I did with a choir out of Dallas. There's a piece called Betty's Notebook, and they bought that. And, they'd collected one of my super rare pieces in the past, so they knew my work, but they weren't buying that for me. They were buying that as this is the first of programmable NFT music, and it's something novel and new, and we're supporting that idea. I think that more than anything, it was that. The piece was great, and I was happy with it, but there was more to it than the artwork itself. It was the tech. And I think, talking about, Beeple or Violetta or, whether it's just thinking of like firsts, these firsts always have extra value because they are the start of an experiment.
I want to talk about when people say bad things about an artist. So there's the Joe Rogan approach, because I consider podcasters to be artists. Probably podcasters in general are the least acknowledged, least appreciated, and make the least amount of money because like 90%
performers,
lose money, right? They're performers, and they are basically doing live, spontaneous, art in real time with other humans. And Joe says, at least what I've heard him say, I'm not looking at comments. I will never look at comments. Hell no. I don't care what anybody thinks because I'm not going to expose myself to what people say about me and my guests. And then there's others, whether they're NFT artists or they're podcasters or they're musicians, and they're in the comments constantly and they're constantly seeing all this negativity. So how do you deal with the criticisms? Winston Churchill's quote comes to mind. It's not the critic that matters. It's the one that's in the ring. It's the one that's bloody. It's the one that's actually putting themselves out there and making it happen. It's the artist. It's the leader. It's the athlete that matters, not the one that can point fingers. Nevertheless, how do you as a creator and how do you as a peer of other creators feel about the criticism that comes your way or the criticism that comes to your friends and your peers? And do you find yourself to get stuck into and sucked into this trap and then kind of spun out? And if you do, is it because they're criticizing you and you're like, I'm standing up for myself? Or you're like, I don't care what people say about me, but they're criticizing her. No one's going to criticize her. I'm going to defend her. So how do you deal with the world of anonymity and undoxed homies and homegirls that can just go in and say whatever they want for whatever reason they want? how do you personally manage your emotions with access to choose to view and engage, or to protect yourself from that? Do you have personal boundaries and rules, or is it just kind of change from time to time?
I mean, I like to read comments, good or bad, because me putting my art out there publicly is to see how it makes people feel. If I was making art for myself, I wouldn't share it with other people, but I'm making art that I like to share with other people. And so I don't, thankfully, I'm lucky in that sense that, if people have harsh criticisms of my art, they keep it in their private chats away from me or something. But I certainly deal with a lot of criticism of the medium, a lot of anti-NFT haters, and I've had to deal with that for 5+ years now. Sometimes people give up that fight against me, and sometimes people hold to their guns on it, and that's totally fine. But that's the harder one, because I can defend what I do, but it's harder to defend the medium because it's diverse and there are scammers and there is, it is a dangerous place and there are people that steal art and all these other things. I can only defend myself in that sense, but that's a much harder aspect. And then the idea of criticism, talking about where my imposter syndrome comes from, that came from going to art school and having professors that did critiques, and they put your art up on the wall and they go, "This sucks."
Right.
And so, but that's what makes you
Right.
a better artist. And so I'm not against critique of art. I think sometimes people can be cruel or hurtful versus just actually pointing out stuff. But I like, usually before I release a piece of art, I'll send it to a couple other artists and get their feedback on it, because I'm sometimes, prior to NFTs, I was working in studios where I would bounce around ideas and work with other people and make things the best it could be. And sometimes it's hard when you're just kind of in your own head in that sense. But yeah, I don't know. I certainly go to the defense of artists sometimes. Sometimes I agree with, criticism, but I don't, it's got to be constructive and not destructive.
I want to ask you some quick answer questions, if you don't mind, just to kind of walk through a few things that have come to mind. Artist royalties. What's your take on secondary artist royalties? Is that mandatory? There's some marketplaces that have basically gone away from it. Blur is an example that kind of set a new standard. And others have said, no matter what, we're going to retain the royalties that are in the smart contract. So what do you think about artist royalties? Do you think there's a fair percent that an artist should be able to retain through a smart contract being honored?
Well, I miss artist royalties because it allowed a lot more experimentation in the space. If you pay royalties and making money, I can give away this thing for free and make money over on the royalties. It allowed a lot more fun ways of going about things that weren't just primary sales, which is what artists mostly have to do now. I lament that those are gone, but they were never mandatory. Even before platforms kind of changed their minds on them, there was plenty of people trading stuff over the counter and doing other stuff and getting around it. And so the idea of it being mandatory implies that there's some sort of punishment. And I am not someone that wants to go punish anybody, especially because usually it's someone selling a piece of art on secondary that they paid for on primary, and I made money off of it. So to be upset about that when, the initial act is what really supported me and I appreciate, doesn't make as much sense. I do think that there is a world in which royalties could come back in certain forms. But there's certain ways, like Sam Spratt doing the thing where if it goes up, you pay, and if it goes down, you don't. Or some people are like, oh, the seller, the buyer should pay and not the seller, and all this other stuff. But in the end, it comes down to cultivating a community that respects you and wants to give you the royalties or the tips or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And I'm grateful that a certain portion of my collectors still pay me royalties, and that money goes to me collecting other artists and all this other stuff. And so, I think it's just a matter of it's a losing battle to try and fight it, but you can encourage good behavior.
Another one, do you have a strong feeling on Ethereum layer 1 versus layer 2s, the polygons of the past, the base of the present. Solana, quite a centralized chain. Bitcoin Ordinals, quite a decentralized chain. Do you have a strong personal take? And how do you feel about artists in the industry that choose to like just be super collaborative? Like, I love it all, I work with all of them, and those that are like, I am only about this. What's your take on that attitude?
I think everything has its strengths and weaknesses. For me, I think one of ones are best on Ethereum mainnet. I think low editions or 721s are best on mainnet. But I think open editions, PFPs, those type of things are better on L2s or Solana or Tezos or whatever. And so, if it's a large amount of volume, it's better not to have the people supporting you lose money just trading it,
Right.
Right now, Ethereum's cheap, and so no one's really complaining about it. But if it shoots up past $5,000, it's going to slow down people trading, and that's just how it goes. And so, maybe there'll be some updates that fix that. But so to me, it's like that makes sense for, special pieces. And I still think, and ordinals are cool too, but even that's even more niche. But yeah, I mean, like I dabble in all of them to a degree and learn lessons. I did a project on Polygon early on. I've done Base. I've done, I'm about to do a Tezos one with Paintbox, which will be my first Tezos mint. But like I collect on all these things. I just don't always mint on them because my 5 years in the space, my collection's already the most complicated, convoluted mix of chains and platforms and contracts. And so I'm always worried about adding more complexity to it.
Yes, I totally get that. When it comes to, I asked about criticism. I want to ask you about whatever you want to call it, encouragement. It's called encouragement. My mentor, who's written like 15 books, he was telling me, I've had thousands of people encourage me about my books, which again is another form of art. You still got a few minutes. I know we're going to stop right now, but I'm waiting for my next guest. Okay, so I just want to ask you this question, and we'll kind of wrap up. So when it comes to encouragement, what my mentor said, and I think it's very relevant for an artist, he says, I've gotten thousands of people telling me they love my book, and it means only so much. Like they bought a book, they bought lots of books, they bought books and gave them away. They tell me how great my book is. They DM me, they text me, they tell me at a conference. I'm grateful. But my hero, who I'd never met before, my hero came up to me and he asked if we could get together. And then he walked into my office and he said, hey, I read your book and I learned this, this, and this. And I read this other book that you wrote and I learned this, this, and this. And can I write the foreword for your next book? And he said, because he had this much favor in my life, when he said that, it was bigger than the other thousands of comments I'd gotten from people I don't know. So what's your take on encouragement, the source of encouragement? Like how do you feel about encouragement coming from your family or your closest friends, or encouragement coming from a hero of sorts? And have you found that what I just shared to be true for you? And do you also recognize that there's people that see you as a hero? And do you feel a sense of opportunity, maybe even responsibility, to encourage other emerging artists that they think of you as a hero because of the community you built, or they think of you as a hero because of the art you've created, or they think of you as a hero because of the things you've accomplished, and you recognize that your voice comes with weight? And so I just want to maybe end on that note, both the encouragement that you might give to others and the encouragement you've received, and how you think through the source of encouragement and the significance by which it lands on the mind and psyche and the heart and emotions of yourself and other people.
Yeah. Oh man, that's a deep question. Going back, my parents were very supportive. They were supportive of me going to art school, which is, a very dangerous proposition for a kid. And I was very fortunate to make a living out of it. And thinking about, the professors that encouraged me, the ones that let me do internships, that, helped me find jobs and all this other stuff. There's a lot of people along the way. One of the biggest people in my life I met 20 years ago on Newgrounds when I was making Flash cartoons. We became friends. He helped me find this college I went to. He helped me find work, and we're still good friends. I'm going to see him next weekend. And he's been, he helped me along the way, and we're encouraging each other. I think that is a huge part of it. Thinking about, how you pay that forward. I'm always trying to think about, how can I support other artists by collecting them, by curating them, by chatting with them, giving them advice. I'm always like, it warms my heart sometimes when I see people and they go, hey, you told me to do this thing like a year or two ago, and it was actually really helpful and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't remember saying that at all, but the fact that it had an impression and helped you is so awesome. And like, that's what, like, I freely give out all this advice. And a big part of that is like, I fully believe in this space and the future of digital art, but like, my success isn't going to be what makes the space a success. It's if I can help 500 other people find success, and then that they'll help other people, and we have to grow. We all have to find success. And so, and not everybody's going to, be Beeple level, but if you can make any money on the side, that is success as an artist. I think a lot of people take for granted because they came in this space at the height of 2021 when everything was selling for stupid amounts. I joined when it was much cheaper, and I was selling one-of-ones for much less. And, and I was, came from a background of like selling, screen prints and all this other stuff. And, most artists are making like $20 here and there selling pieces of art. And like, that is not a bad thing. If you can make $20 selling a couple editions here and there in the space, that is still income for your art. I think there's just there's these expectations that are built up from that bubble that we have to overcome. The space isn't going to be a full-time job for everybody, but it can be a side hustle for a lot of people, as long as you keep with it long term. And so, I think the more artists that myself and others can uplift and they find success, that will only come back to help myself. It'll only come back to help the space. And so I think that is just always something on my mind. And plus, I love to collect art. I mean, you see all this stuff behind me. I have boxes and boxes of prints. Like, it's in my blood to collect junk, not junk, art, but some of it's junk. But like, I have vinyl records and video games. I love to collect. And so, it's not like, I get equal enjoyment out of collecting and flexing my collection as I do showing my own art. I might get more enjoyment out of it because I don't like to show myself all the time, but and it's fun to like go toe to toe with some of the top collectors and be like, oh, you got that piece? Well, I got this piece,
Yes. Bryan, this was one of my favorite conversations I've had over 7 years. My producers have given me questions in case I needed help asking things. I didn't look at any of them. I was just wildly curious, and I was fascinated that all these years you and I never actually sat down and did this before. This was a joy. Thank you for giving me the freedom to ask some very deep and thought-provoking philosophical questions that are not that easy to answer, but I felt welcome by you and your responses to do so. I would assume that this conversation might have some life and some wings over the next week and month, and for all the future artists, maybe in a year or a decade, or even in a couple hundred years, Bryan's descendants, as you look back and say, oh, this is a conversation that my great-great-great-great-grandfather had that had some traction to it. I'm so grateful for those that watch this live or in the future, and I'm grateful that we have this medium of the internet and computers and software to be able to come together for a half hour in different parts of the world as preparation for something that we're looking forward to at the end of June. So, Bryan, I look forward to seeing you at NFT NYC, and I thank you for jumping in with me. And I will let you go. I already kept you a few minutes late. Everyone go and follow at BRYAN, BRINKMAN. Check out what he's doing. It's inspirational just to be around the internet energy that he and his peers are constantly co-creating together. Bryan, until next time, Thank you for being here with me.
Please, let's have it next time. It's great chatting.
Peace, my friend.